Law and Order. Dong dong. Well, hello, guys. Welcome back to Pencil, not pencil, 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 2O pencil. Your favorite live cast featuring real live expert cartoonists in the flesh. We come to you every welcome to Fantasy Island. We come to you live every Wednesday, 8 p.m. EST, talking about the industry, shop talk. Sometimes we have fantastic guests, and I think if we have a guest, if we don't have a guest, every episode is must-see interneting. Welcome back to the show. I am your first host. My name is JAMAR NICHOLAS. I am a cartoonist in good standing, and also I have to put my honorifics up. A new board member of the National Cartoonist Society, the standing third president of the NCS. And you guys, I don't know if you knew this, the brand new installed Philadelphia chair of the Philadelphia chapter of the National Cartoon Society. Well, hello. I wear many hats. I would be, I'm going to go right to it because I don't want to keep Dan waiting. But there's other stuff I do. All right, I'll do this. Also, I am a cartoonist, and in the traditional book space, they call me an author-illustrator. Hey, thanks, Steve. Leon the Extraordinary is today, 10/4, good buddy, is the first year book birthday of Leon the Extraordinary. Came out 10/4 last year.
So you're 2 years, so you're one year old.
Yeah, it's a 1 year old. He's walking now. The next book in the series. Wow, yeah. Hold on, let's move these graphics. When did you do that? That's fantastic. Thank you. The next volume in the Leon series, Worst Friends Forever, will be in stores summer 2024. I can't wait. Thank you. Look at that. That's so cool. I'm gonna wear that on my back the rest of the night. I would be remiss if I didn't introduce my other co-host. He is known in these streets as through the belt motion, world heavyweight champion of webcomics. That's right. He's got the atomic elbow. He is Stone Cold Steve Conley. What's up, Steve Conley?
Hello, guys. So good to see you. For folks who don't know who I am, my name is Steve Conley. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age, nominated for Eisner's, Ringo's, the NCS Division Award. And I also make TTRPG content like the Emmy-nominated Intoximancy. And I think I would be remiss.
Yes.
I didn't introduce the Tower Power, the Man of the Hour, too sweet to be sour, America's Mike Manley.
Tom Dowell's going to be mad. Hey, hey, Mike.
Wow. Hello, America.
Okay, TV's Mike Manley. How about that?
I'm yours, America.
As seen on TV, Mike Manley.
That's right, as seen on TV.
Right. Mike Manley, what do you do, pray tell?
I do 2 syndicated comic strips, Judge Parker and The Phantom. Also, there's some breaking news with that this week.
Oh, yeah?
Go to my Facebook page. I posted 2 links because Gannett Newspapers, which is, I guess, they own USA Today, has decided to do a major reboot of all of their newspapers.
What?
And so they are no longer carrying both of those strips. And so for longtime readers of these comic strips, and not just the Phantom and Judge Parker, but a lot of strips got bumped. So what they did is they condensed what they're carrying. So they're just like boiling it all down. So supposedly there's still a chance that if your paper lost your favorite strips, that you could write to your local features editor of your local newspaper and say, hey, what happened to my favorite strips? Wow. Maybe it will have an effect, but you can look at them online. You can always, of course, read my strips every day at comicskingdom.com, which is the King Features website. And I posted a link on my Facebook page to the USA Today page which will link to the strips that they are carrying. So I guess if the strip is not available in your paper, you should still be able to follow it online.
Wow, that's wild news. And I've seen some other strip cartoonists kind of across the socials today, kind of talking about this in their own way, kind of about like, you know, maybe this is a new chance to kind of, you know, write a letter to your editor, like how people used to do things back in the day. You know, a good old letter writing campaign still
Right.
has.
You got to get a whole
legs.
bunch of magazines, cut each letter out, and tape it down.
Tell
Unabomber.
people where they can find stamps, Mike.
I think you have to go to
I know.
something called Popo, but I'm not sure if that's the post office or the police. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is just the time we live in. Newspapers are really struggling, and the first thing papers tend to cut are features, which I always find sort of ironic because most papers, unless it's like your local paper and it's talking about how the cow got out of the barn and did something locally, you know, the news is pretty old by the time it gets printed in the paper. So the features are one of the things that people like about their newspapers, you know, Irma Bombeck or, you know, recipes, all that kind of stuff. So.
And I this is kind of a silly question, Mike, but and this, did you get like any kind of notice or almost like a national alert on your phone?
Nope.
About
comic
this?
strips are being canceled. Comic strips are being canceled. Look to the skies. No, nothing like that.
Yeah. Like, how do you prepare for that? Or
you don't.
You just always have to kind of be prepared?
Well, I mean, as we've talked about before, I'm always sort of the wolf is at the door. Well,
he'll be back.
The trigger finger Mousy has. But one of the, there you are. You got to get you got to get a old style mouse for the podcast.
I know. I'm sorry. Continue.
You don't really know. You don't really know. I don't know. You know, honestly, I don't know how many papers I'm in. If you were like if I was Charles Schultz and I created Peanuts, then I would be in a partnership with the syndicate. Right. And then I would know what my numbers were because I would get a different deal, right? So since I have no ownership stake in the strips that I draw, I'm not privy to that information, nor is any other cartoonist who is working for any syndicate, you know, United Media or, you know, King. You don't know because you're not a co-owner of the strip. So when we heard 3 weeks ago, I think it was, that news went across everybody's bow that Gannett was condensing the papers, I expected within a fair amount of time, shortly, that I would hear from the syndicate going, well, this is how it affects you as a creator. And just about everybody got letters this week. So I talked with several other people that do continuity strips like mine. And everybody was just sort of waiting, but that's just the way the business is, and you have to sort of expect. Animation's the same thing, right? No one's going to tell you necessarily that the show is going to be canceled, or you don't know. You do your season, and then it's like, are we going to get renewed? And that time between when you would get renewed for another season, it's like longer and longer and longer and longer now, it seems.
Yeah.
So you should always have as a cartoonist, the creator, you should always have a rainy day fund.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah.
And every week we've been, the last maybe couple of months, we've been doing kind of like these really deep dive Q&As about what's going on currently in the industry. It's affecting everyone in different ways across different, there's different storms coming across different bows of everybody's ships. The water's still wet and it's hitting everybody at the same way, just in different ways, like comics, even with the whole distributor, like tumult is a thing, the syndicates kind of crashing around newspaper strips. And I read this little factoid. I don't know how true or not it is, but it, on top of all of this bad news and everything, it's really interesting to always kind of keep in the back of our minds that there are a lot of people that never even get on the boat. You know what I'm saying? And this quote that I'm totally forgetting was like, I think it was like 0.06% of books ever get made, and a lot of people like start things and they never finish them.
Oh gosh, yes.
You know what I'm saying? So as wild and unstable as this business is, there's still something to be said about striking forward.
Yeah, I remember hearing a while ago that at one point there was something like 70,000 movie scripts slushing around in Hollywood, and it is rare that anything actually gets made. So many things get, you might get a tug on your line, right? But you make it all the way. So many things have to fall into place.
That's why I think I look at some of these really bad movies or bad any entertainment. I was like, you know what? But it's done. Good or bad, it's done.
Right. There's something about finishing things, and I talk about that a lot in mixed company with people, and I've been on the road, you guys, and once in a while where I'm at these things, like a young person will come up and ask me what's important or what should I have, or what website should I do. I was like, just make things and finish them. That's probably the best advice I could give somebody.
Hey, that's got to be an episode title coming up.
Yeah, let's write that down. So
finish
you guys
finish it. It'll be
like the Mortal Kombat.
Mortal Kombat, right? Yeah.
Finish it. So speaking of that, I don't want to leave Dan Santat in the green room too much longer because we're just wasting precious seconds. We could be talking to my man. So let me give you a little bit of the genesis of how this worked. So since I've been in this traditional book space, it's almost like I'm starting over. I've done comics and things like that for 25 years, and I've dipped my toe in several parts of this pond. And people would talk about all of these players in this new world, and like all these names get flying around. And it's like, oh, do you know so and so? Nah, no. Oh, you know what? You're gonna love them here. And somebody hands you like a pile of books, like you do research on people. And I kept hearing Dan Santat's name all the time. And, just from the circles of authors and author illustrators that I'm traveling in, everybody says, and, I've said this myself, everybody in comics is the nicest guy in comics. So-and-so is the nicest guy in comics. But no one has a sour word to say about Dan. And I finally met him, and I felt like we're best friends after our first conversation. And I just the output of what Dan's done in his time just in the traditional book space is monumental. Not even to touch on being in Hollywood and doing animation and other projects, film features, and all kind of stuff. I'm still catching up. So if I kind of say the wrong thing about what Dan's done, he can correct me. But that's why I wanted to have him on the show, you guys. I am really happy to unlock another door in this whole creative industry and have more author illustrators on the show. So I've talked enough. Let's bring in Dan Santat. I'm very excited. All right, Dan, prepare for warp. I'm going to bring him onto the screen. All right, everybody, welcome Dan Santat to Pencil to Pencil. Woo. Rendering. There you go. Sorry about that, Dan. We had to.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the kind words.
I had to prime the pump a little bit. So Dan, one of the things I've been telling people since I've been doing all of this kind of like scholastic stuff is that I think a lot of people just assume like, oh well, so you just draw like stuff in a different pool, and they're surprised that I travel so much.
Okay.
You know, and I think maybe a hidden part of all this author stuff is how busy you get in a whole different way.
Yeah. There is this thing in children's publishing where, and you know, earlier you guys were talking about that small percentage of people that actually get published, or the small percentage of people that get to see, like, you know, the next level, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was just having this conversation with a friend recently about just the mere concept of being invited to a conference filled with librarians. Like I've been doing it for about, oh boy, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's something that I don't even think twice about, you know, like every year I always assume like, oh yeah, I'm going to some conferences, I'm going to a book festival, but you know, you have to always keep in mind like, oh gosh, there's a good 95% of this industry that doesn't get that, right? And you know, I remember starting out in this industry, and my first book was with Scholastic. I did a book with Arthur Levine, and it's funny because like my upbringing was mostly comics. You know, like back in the day, I had a paper route. If we're going back to syndicated papers and stuff.
Wow.
Let's take it back to the essence.
Right. Which is hilarious because, you know, I was 12 years old delivering newspapers early in the morning, right? And I would deliver it to about like 52 to 60 houses. And I would do that before I went to school. And it was great because I'd make like a good $120 a month. And then I would go down to the liquor store, blow it all on comics, right? Because my parents, they came from Thailand, so they weren't really familiar with Western classics, like, you know, whatever books that you would find on the shelf. And as a result, like I was just not a fond I just wasn't fond of reading. Like, you know, the teachers would give you a book, a librarian would give you a book, and you'd be like, this is not fun. And my parents, they were destined for me to grow up and be a doctor. So, you know, they were very utility type readers that would just give me a math book or a science book and be like, well, just get better at science, read a science book. I was just like, reading sucks. You know? And so when I had this paper route, it was being bequeathed to me by another kid in the neighborhood. And he used to have a trunk full of Marvel comics. And it was like everybody, Thor, Punisher, X-Men, New Mutants, X-Factor, East Coast. I don't know anybody who read West Coast Avengers. He had like all the West Coast Avengers. And I'm like, okay, you're die hard, right?
Right.
And like, I kind of realized like, oh, this is the soap opera that I've been wanting my entire life. And so I started collecting comics. And that really was what got me to fall in love with comics. And then I think, you know, like anybody else, I think you just get overwhelmed by the idea of making one.
Yeah.
Like, that's so terrifying. Like, oh gosh, you would look at it like 22 pages. You did that in 30 days? Like, that's insane, right? And you know as well as I do how hard it is just to make one book, you know? And you're like, maybe I can get it done in 2 years, you know, maybe, right? And it's just a constant struggle. And so, you know, when we're talking about different levels, it's funny because there are people who are diehard comic people who go to the cons and they set up their booth in the artist alley and they're selling their zines and stuff like that. And I noticed that there's like a line certain like diehard comic people won't cross. Like, they don't want to go to the traditional publisher and like get the big advance to make their books. Like, they would rather just hoof it and like just be, you know, like old salt of the earth kind of guys, right? You know, and you know, boy, you know, like I've seen some people like they dip their foot into the publishing industry,
Yeah.
and some people tread, you know, some people tread well, they do well. I'll be honest with you, like a lot of them have floundered, like they're just not really comfortable with the whole idea of having an editor and an art director telling them what to do. But for those who stick it out and they get used to the industry, like, you know, they love it.
Yeah.
Right. And it was the model that I originally knew. And so, you know, I remember going to San Diego Comic-Con. Like I was a San Diego Comic-Con kid because I went to college in San Diego. I went to UC San Diego back in '93. And back then you could park across the street for like $6 and change, and you could just feed a meter. You could feed a meter. You were there for the day. $6, right?
Yeah.
And now you can't get within 10 miles of that place without having to fork out $150 for a spot for the day, right? And so, yeah, I would go there, and it was like back in the time when it was all about comics, like the Golden Comics section was huge. And I went down there, and I remember I was a microbiology major because I was like, my parents were like, you're going to grow up and be a doctor. I went to UC San Diego, got a microbiology degree, got accepted into dental school. And then all my college roommates were like, dude, you're going to be the worst dentist. You're gonna hurt so many people. And they knew how much I love to draw. They were just like, you know, because at the time I was playing hockey, I was a goalie, and like I would paint my own helmet, and then it just got caught word around the league. Suddenly all these other goalies are like, hey, can you paint my helmet? Can you paint my helmet? And I was just like making money, like painting other people's helmets. And, you know, like my roommates, they just knew that I had this love for art. And they're like, yeah, why are you doing this? Like, why are you going to dental school? And I remember going to San Diego Comic-Con and just being so completely like intimidated because you're looking at all this art. I'd never gotten any art instruction up to that point. And I'm like looking at everybody's work. I'm like, there's no way I could compete with these people. Right. And so it wasn't until my roommates convinced me, I was like this close to head out the door to go to like dental school, right? And my roommates were just like, just apply to art school, just see if you can get into art school. Aren't you curious? And so I did. I applied to all these art schools. I went around San Diego finding figure drawing workshops and things like that. And I got into all these art schools. I ended up enrolling in the Art Center College of Design, and I thought I wanted to be an animator, right? And so I'm taking like a 3D, like I'm taking a Maya class, and I'm learning how to animate it. Absolutely hate it. You know, takes 14 weeks to make 1 minute of film. And like you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I've got this ball. I want to make it nice and shiny. Where's the shiny button? Right. And then it's like, you know, some like computer programming nerd was like there writing it in like computer code jargon, just like, well, you know, we have a sine wave here, and you need to measure the specularity between 0 and 1. Like, I just want to make the ball shiny. Like, what's wrong with you? This is terrible. It's an absolute nightmare. And it was at that moment where I realized I'm not infatuated with the process of making the art. I'm infatuated with the process of telling the story. And there's got to be a better way to tell stories, right? And then just down the hall, there was a children's book illustration course. And it was me and this one other guy, Peter Brown, who, he went on, he's gone on to do some really fabulous things. Actually, just DreamWorks just announced that they're turning his book, The Wild Robot, into a movie. And so that's how I got my foot in the business. I got into children's publishing, but my heart really goes to comics. And I remember going to Comic-Con, and I thought, God, I'm trying to remember what year this was. I want to say it was like 2000. I want to say it was like 2004. Where our imprint graphics, it was born. It was like born, and like they had a list of all these webcomic people that they wanted to work with. And I eventually found out that like of all those webcomic artists, I think out of like they signed like 15, 20 people.
A lot of people at first, right?
And like only 2 of them ended up making something that got published, because the other ones, they were just completely overwhelmed. Like, what do you mean a deadline? I just put out stuff when I want to. And they were like, it's time for us to grow up and be professionals, folks. I mean, they gave you a nice bag of money. You gotta You got to deliver, right? And that's kind of the weird thing that I notice about, like, they don't like to be told what to do, And it's like, oh, if you're going to give me a deadline, I would rather walk. I would rather go there and staple my pages together and like, hey, buy this, please. And so, to each his own. But
Dan, let's talk about that for a second, because I think with kind of the tectonic plates have shifted, and we've talked forever about how geek culture is pop culture, and now the explosion of graphic novels is made a lot of people really, really interested in what's going on in traditional book world.
Right.
And we've been talking about this off and on for a while. I think, especially me and people who come from the comic book side, this is the water you breathe anyway.
Right.
So like, I don't really see what the big difference is. I'm just going to go over here and do this thing. And a lot of people hit this wall where they find out that it's not exactly as easy as they thought it was. Not necessarily that the work is different or the deadlines are different. It's kind of like the algorithm is different. You know what I mean? Like going through agents and having editors and all those other staff people. Yeah. And sometimes even being able to, bless you, deal with people telling you to slow down and let's kind of go through this idea and pick at it.
Right.
Because even on my end, when I started coming into this world, that I would tell people like, oh, well, I have an editorial team, and they go, what? They tell you your stuff is wrong? How do you go tell you it's wrong?
Yeah, man.
So well, maybe we could talk about that for a second, like some of the I guess maybe the point of entry for people who are coming from different, I don't know, parts of creative into traditional book publishing.
Right.
Like what makes people trip in that space?
So here's the thing. I mean, I have several comments on that. So one is, I think a lot of people come in with their preconceived ideas of what an editor's job is, right? And like 99% of the people who know nothing about publishing think that the editor's job is to make you sell out. And they tell you, you do this, you do that, right? And it's not it couldn't be further from the truth.
Right.
Right? The job of an editor is to say, what is it that you're trying to say? Mm-hmm. And then they read your material and they either say, okay, you're on the right track, or this is not what this says. They're an unbiased voice that's trying to say, like, look, I'm trying to, we gave you an advance because we believe in your story. We just want to help your story be the best it can be, And I think the misnomer that a lot of people have is, oh yeah, like everybody likes dinosaurs, like those editors are gonna make you put in raptors, and you're like who you been talking to? Like you just like kind of, you were watching some Daniel Clowes movie, and you're just like, yeah, that's how comics is, right? and it couldn't be further from the truth. Actually, did you see that movie recently, Funny Pages?
Oh,
no, it's on the list though.
Okay, so it was hilarious because it wasn't Daniel Clowes, but it was someone who was really inspired by Daniel Clowes, right? Like they wished that they were, they wish they were Robert Crumb, right? And it just had that really dingy, creepy, unsettling, like, I don't know if I would be friends with these guys kind of vibe, right? And the whole time the guy is just reminiscing about comics that were just of an old era and just like, these are real comics, right? But then when it came to making comics, like he was he was fawning over a guy who did color separation for Image Comics, thinking like, that's my way into the door. And I'm like, you know what? If you were a real classic comic guy, like you would probably never mingle with that color separator guy, right? And then also the kid was like completely clueless on how to break into comics. And I'm like, never once heard about zines or like one-offs or anything like that. Going to Artist Alley, selling your work. It was just like someone was a huge Daniel Clowes fan and then just kind of wanted to echo what they think Daniel Clowes would want to hear.
Right.
And then they just immediately think it's gospel. So a lot of people are like, they come in with this preconceived idea of what the publishing world is, like watching Elf 50 times and thinking like, oh no, like asparagus is too sensitive. Like, well, we need, it's so passe, right? And it's like that's not what it is, right? And so there is something about comic folks that are very diligent about deal, right? Just like, like almost this feeling of like you pay your dues, you it's the world of hard knocks where traditional publishing is not all glitz and glamour, right? I think traditionally you get your 2-book deal, you go out there and you just pray that you earn out your advance because that publisher's watching and seeing how well you sell before they consider, let's give that kid a third shot, right? I mean, just going back about how hard it is to stay in publishing. So I remember reading a statistic where it was something crazy. It was like 92% of authors don't publish more than 1 book. Right. And I remember I was at the National Book Festival and we went to the Library of Congress and we just went through the list of authors and it was like 1 book, 1 book, 1 book, 1 book,
Wow.
1 book,
Wow.
2 books, 1 book, 1 book. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's a lot of people that tried and failed. And it's a variety of things. It's timing, it's a whole assortment of things. Like, maybe you just didn't hit, maybe your book just didn't hit the right stride during that particular cultural zeitgeist or whatever, like all kinds of things. But for me, being in this business for 20 years, despite all that, I just know, like, what? You have to hustle faster and harder than everybody else to stay in this business. That's really what it is. And so, when you're looking at someone who is more comfortable making comics their own way and their own time, and then suddenly saying, oh, we have a system here to get this book out in the next year and a half, that throws a lot of people off. They're just like, I don't want that. I just want my safe little place. I don't care if you're giving me more money. I'm happy doing this. So I think that's kind of a bit of insight to what I think is why people just don't.
You can have 1 marshmallow now or 2 marshmallows in a year and a half.
Right. And like I'm even at a point where, oh my gosh, and it's there's authors that I know where I'll make the book, but I'm not gonna go hustle and sell it. I'm not gonna go. And you're like, are you kidding? Like, are you out of your mind? Like, do you know how many authors would kill for this opportunity to go on a book tour, to go speak at schools, to do whatever? And you're saying no, thank you. Like, how many people would kill for that, right? And so, like, I'm someone that, look, I almost became a dentist, right? And I'm just like, yeah, I could have been a dentist, but I get to draw pictures. I get to make comics for a living. Like, I'm grateful for every day I'm in this business. I'm so, like, you don't understand. Like, going to have to cram for a microbial genetics exam that you know little to nothing about, okay? And you're like, oh, but you could spend the next 2 years illustrating this picture book. Yes, thank you. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
You don't miss.
Stay at home and I can wear Lululemon pants. Yes.
You don't miss the opportunity to dig into someone's mouth during a pandemic.
So Dan, the chat is starting to come alive. I think there's a little bit of system shock.
Like, how dare you?
So hold on, Bill Wiss, what up, Bill? Says my cousin's a dentist. I think he can get every day of it. I did not think the show would be going this way, but we do have a question. The beginning of our questions is from our buddy Jamal, and I want to, Dan, keep picking through your history.
Oh my gosh.
He asked a very specific question. How do you schedule your project once you've been given the green light? Can you kind of maybe go through quickly, kind of like, I don't know, a timeline of a book and how you tackle a project?
Yeah. So I know my strengths and weaknesses. I know what needs to be done very quickly in order to stay on schedule. Now, for me personally, I'm constantly juggling 3 or 4 projects at the same time. Right now, I've got 8. I've got to get 3 graphic novels done by the end of next year. I think I bit off more than I can chew. But on top of that, I'm illustrating like 4 picture books and 2 middle grade books. I'm gonna die. And that's not even including like going out and traveling and speaking at schools. So for me, you know, it breaks up in 3 stages. Script, like turn in the script, turn in the sketches, turn in the line art, turn in the colors, right? And so for me, I say, what is the day you need the script? What is the day you need the sketches? What is the day you need the final tight line work? What day do you need the colors? And it really is just looking at your schedule. I have, you know, I have it all laid out on my computer, and I say, okay, I have till April 4th to get these sketches done. And so what, give me what, 90 days to do all that? Like, fine, then no matter what it takes, just remember that April 4th is in your mind. And I actually got one of these little pieces of advice from a comic friend of mine. He said, you know what, you do 2 pages a day and just stick to that, and you're good, right? And so I did that, and remarkably, you just get a tremendous amount of work done. And if I fall behind, I make up for it the other day. But you know, I might be working on my own personal project, and then maybe I'm illustrating another picture book. I don't go to the picture book until I knock out my 2 pages a day. And so I drop off my kids at school. I'll go for a run. You know, I probably won't sit down at my desk until 9:30. And then I just ink until, usually it takes me till noon. Right. And then that gives me the time to do other projects. But I noticed that the tighter everything is, the more efficient I am, or like a better job that I do in the first stages, tighter sketches, tighter line work, then the colors and everything else, they all fall into place. And I just make, like, I'll have a colorist. I'll have a friend that's a colorist. I'll just give him color keys, and I'm just like, just fill it in. I'll add the shadows and highlights. But the color work is like the most tedious part. And so, yeah, I basically just look at what's on my plate, and you know, it's king of the hill. You're just kind of like, bring it on. What do you have in my way? I have to knock it out of the way. Yeah.
So Dan, what compels you to kind of take on so much at one time? Because, you know, I know we all kind of, I think it's hard for anybody to say no to anything.
Right.
But I know you kind of work well under, like, I don't know, like that Secret Wars cover where the Hulk is holding the mountain up. But I think some people enjoy that pressure.
So there's 2 things, and I think they're a little interrelated. One is, sometimes you get a project so good, you'd be a fool not to take it, right? Someone comes up to you and says, how would you like to illustrate the 90th anniversary of The Little Engine That Could? And you're like, well, I would be a fool not to take that job. Right. So you take that job. But then there's moments where, and like I said, I've been in this business for 20 years, but the feeling of self-doubt and insecurity never goes away. Every time you get a job, you're like, this could be the very last job I ever do in my entire life. Right. And you're like, I better take this job so I can feed my family. And then, like, and here's the thing about freelancing, is that when it rains, it pours. Phone's quiet for like 3 or 4 months, and suddenly 4 projects come in. Oh, you want to work on this project? I'm like, did you all just get together and say, let's pick on Dan? Right. And you're like, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, that's a really good one. I'll do that. Like, yeah, that sounds fun. I'll do that. Right. And then suddenly your plate's full. And you're kind of just in this position where you sit there and you're like, I don't know when my next project's gonna come, but you know, like, you never know. And it used to be in the beginning, it used to be that I was green, I was new in the business, and I said, I need to go out and prove to people that I belong in this business. And people don't know who I am, so I need to establish myself, and I have to work my butt off, and I need to do the best job I can in each project that I do. Now it's a little different. And despite all my successes and what I've managed to do in this career, I still have a sizable amount of imposter syndrome, right? Where I've had the success, but then I'll stop and I'll look at myself and I'll say, why me? Like, why do people want to hire me? Like, what? And there's hundreds, thousands of talented people out there. And you look at their work and you say, well, why not them? Why not her? Why not so-and-so? Why me? Right? and you sit there and you're scratching your head and you're like, I need to really live up to this. I feel like I need to feel like I'm earning this title, this prestige that I've earned, right? And so a lot of it, I hate to say it, a lot of it comes from insecurity of just like, this could be the last job I ever get. Or it could also be a case of like, you know, like, I don't think people know that I'm not really as good as like this new talent that's out there. Like, and they can get that new talent for like a third of the cost, like whatever, you know? And because for a long time, and I don't know if you guys do this, but you look at your peers, you look at the people that were in the business 10, 15 years before you, and you keep an eye on them. You say, well, where are they in their career? You know, they're building up their empires, they're doing really well. And then it just comes to a certain age where maybe they're slowing down a little. Maybe their production is not as robust, or maybe their book came out and it wasn't grabbing the attention of readers like it used to. And you stop there and you think to yourself, like, well, what is it? Like, does the world move on to something else? Or does that particular talent lose their edge and they just can't communicate with the world anymore because they just refuse to like change with the society, right? Think about these things and you're very mindful. And I'm always very mindful of like, okay, and you know, maybe I'm putting it's adding to the self-doubt of myself, but I'm thinking like, okay, I've been here for 20 years. I think people are getting maybe a little tired of Dan Santat, you know? Maybe I'm getting a little long on the tooth. Maybe I'm getting a little old. This could be the last project I work on because
it goes back around.
Right. And it never goes away. And you're just like, damn it. You know, like what a sick, vicious cycle I've put in my
Now, I think everybody who's been in the business a long time, who doesn't stagnate also, has that little bit of that, if not the imposter syndrome, but if you're overly confident.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right? If you're overly confident and you go, well, obviously I don't need to, I've arrived, everyone, here I am, right? I'm fantastic, great. Usually what happens is those people flame out. Those people flame out. And if you read any creative person, a writer, a musician, a cartoonist, a painter, everyone has those doubts. I think maybe the difference is that things are changing very fast now.
Yeah.
Right? If I look at the first half of my career and the second half of my career, things really didn't change the first half of my career. You know, Photoshop came in, and it kind of slowly, you know, moved over. And then I look at the second half, and it's this constant blizzard of change.
Right.
Right? Just like what, a week ago or 10 days ago was the anniversary of the AI thing blowing up last year, right? Yeah. And so, like, before that, there was whatever boogeyman there was before that. Now, that's like the King Kong, and that's everybody's worrying about that. You know, people doing kids' books are worrying about that. People are doing animation are worrying about that. I just posted this week about how the new DALL-E 3 people are, you know, able to do, they're shitty, but they're able to do comics. And I've seen a whole thing about people doing kids' books where they get the AI to write it, and then they get the AI to draw it, and they're like all proud of what they've done, you know. Yeah. Like those people don't suffer from imposter syndrome.
They're
more than happy to have the robots do all the work, and then them, you know, hold their book up and look what I didn't do.
Right. Right. You know, it's interesting because I remember messing around with Midjourney because I really wanted to understand what it is that how good it was. And I think it started off because, you know, you looked at DALL-E 1 and you're like, oh, this is hysterical. This is adorable. Like, it doesn't even know what a Christmas tree is, right? Because I was joking around like, oh, I'm going to make my holiday card. I remember saying like, I'm going to make a holiday card, you know, using DALL-E. And it was like a Christmas tree. And it was like this weird, like Asian dude with like 3 eyes holding a bowl of soup. And I'm like, I don't know what this has to do with these holidays, but you know, and I just like, I emailed to everybody. I'm like, happy holidays from the Santat family, right? It's like hilarious. And then literally the very next year, I remember it was such a sobering moment. I was just like, oh, Dolly got really good in like 1 year. It was terrifying how good it was, right? And so people were starting to share images that they did on Midjourney, and I was like, all right, well, let me check out what's on Midjourney, right? And you had to go through a Discord server, and through Discord, you would see people doing the prompts of what they wanted Midjourney to do. And I remember looking at it, and here's where I find that if you give the people the power to do whatever they want, it will be absolutely wasted. Because you're looking at all the prompts of what people want. 99% of people want a photorealistic space marine that kind of looks like aliens, fighting some robot, in some anime form, or a woman with big tits and a giant gun, like fighting a dragon that looks like Kim Jong-ji drew it. Like that's 99% of all the prompts. And you look at it and you think, well, no one wants to draw like Dan Santat, so I should be okay. Because everybody wants to draw like that one guy, right? And it's like, wow, when you give the people the power, it's completely squandered because they have absolutely no ability to think outside of the box or for themselves.
Well, I mean, it's funny just thinking about, if you step out of a time machine into the future and, you have a device with everything you ever needed to know in your pocket.
Right.
But you're making, I don't know, Kevin James memes.
Yeah, right.
I feel like, I think I agree with you, Dan.
Yeah. I mean, not to say that AI isn't like improving at a frightening rate.
Sure.
But I mean, my point of view is that I think if you have something to contribute and it's good, people will want it.
Right.
I mean, the only thing you have to really worry about is that if there's so much content out there that you're drowning out by this long tail of it, then that's another issue. It's just like, all right, everybody, like there's a lot of shows on Netflix. I just want to watch 3 of them, right? Things can get very overproduced very quickly. But I confidently think like maybe that's going to be a cycle. Because if you remember, there was that period where everyone's like, oh, I can self-publish my book. I don't have to go through a self-publisher. And then they just make a book in like 2 weeks. They put it on Amazon and they just watch it die. And they're like, publishing stupid. Like, no, you're fucking dumb. Because you thought that you could just throw a book out there. Like, easy peasy, right? And so it's that whole thing where it's like 99% of the people are too lazy to do the work. They're going to go away, right? It's the people that actually love the craft that are going to stick around because they wouldn't do anything else anyway. They would just do what they love, right? So AI is going to be this big, amazing tool that people are only going to want to be like, oh, make me something that's like kind of like, Pokemon. Okay, no, change my mind. Give me exactly Pokemon, but just with different colors. Like that's basically what they're going to do, right?
I think you touched on something really interesting there. And, in a lot of these conversations about kind of like where the future's going, it's all very frightening. And I'm waiting any moment to be downtown in Philly and a naked guy like ionizes into the middle of the Broad Street. And I'm like, well, here we are. Terminator's coming. But like right now, I feel like it always comes back to the work, right? And at the beginning of the show, you said you work your ass off. And I'll even say everybody in these little Brady Bunch blocks are hard charging workers. Some things that we talk about a lot on the show, Dan, is kind of when the rubber hits the road or the dream crashes against the wall of reality.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, some people get really kind of, I don't know, sad about what we're talking about. It's like, well, sorry, I didn't watch Game of Thrones. Sorry, I missed all of Ahsoka. I was working. And it sounds like you're being some sort of like, I don't know.
I don't watch TV.
Well, but you know what I mean? And I know people who don't own televisions and have a piano in their living room. Those people are great. But I think there's something really to be said about just working and even being on the road or promotion and all those kind of things, where maybe going back to the oasis of what people think, or the mirage, what people think of traditional book publishing, is that now that you've made it, Dan, and you have an agent and a publicist and all of these people that you can sit back and just count these bags of money.
That's, so, and I've spoken with other Caldecott medalists. So the thing is that couldn't be further from the truth, because the award is such a great award that it's something you have to live up to, right? Like if you had imposter syndrome and then you won a Caldecott medal, you're like, oh God, like why did they give me one of these, right? And then suddenly you're terrified. Imagine this. You spent your entire life climbing a mountain saying, someday I'm going to reach the top. And then one day you get to the top. You're like, what? I'm here. I never thought I'd make it here. And then you're elated. You're filled with this high, right? And then you look around and you ask yourself, where do I go now? What do I do? You have this existential crisis of, wait, what do I do with my work now? Do I have to make another Caldecott medal winning book in order to feel this way? Mm-hmm. It's horrible. And you're reaching out, and it's amazing. There's this thing that, all these Caldecott medalists, they'll email you, they'll phone call you and say, if you want to talk, I'm right here.
It's like a support system.
It's a support group. It's a support group because they understand that we all go through this, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just this overwhelming feeling of like, oh my God, like what just happened, right? It's very life-changing. Mm. And so, when I remember this award, and I just want to get some advice from you to hear like how it is that you moved on from this. And he said, listen, William Shakespeare wrote some great stuff. He wrote Romeo and Juliet. He wrote Othello. He wrote, Hamlet. But he also wrote some real shit in between. And he said, it's inevitable that you're going to write something not as good as your best. But you get that out of your system and you move on. And sometimes you make your duds, but sometimes you knock it out of the fucking park and you just keep going. And then you make a body of work. And it's like, and you know what? You might be doing yourself a favor of doing a dud, because then it's over. Like you don't have to like feel like you have to bat 1,000 anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And it's been 8 years since I won the Caldecott medal, and since then, like I've been doing books that I found personally to be better than BEEKLE, right? And on a personal level, it's like I feel like it wasn't a hoax. Like, oh, I made a really great piece of work, but I managed on a personal level to do it again. Mm-hmm. Despite what my peers say, despite what my audience says, I'm very proud of this book. And then the next one, and maybe you'll win an award here, maybe you'll win an award there or something. But like you get some distance from that award, and it wears off, because you don't want to. It almost has that weird like high school football vibe, like, hey, remember that time Polk High 4 touchdowns back in 62? Like you don't want, hey, remember I won that Caldecott medal back in 2014? Like that was you don't
want to be at the bar at the book fair. Hey kid, come over here.
Right.
About that time.
Yeah, you don't want to be that guy. You want people to be enamored with the current work that you're doing. You want to grow. You want to be that person that's like, I'm excited to see what your next work is.
Yeah, I would imagine that anyone who has a long career, and that's something we talk about too a lot on this podcast, is a career is long. Mm-hmm. And if you look at anyone who has a very long career, they have ups, they have downs.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I have observed is that if you have large success immediately, sometimes that is actually something that kind of like chicken legs you, kind of like it because you don't necessarily know how to handle it. And you think about people like, I don't know, like Stephen King or somebody who's written like a zillion books. Mm-hmm. It's like they have this habit, no matter what, they sit down every day and they work, and then maybe it's crap, and they get rid of it. But it's about the work. It's about being dedicated to the process.
Right.
And one of the things you were talking about before, I think, is that there's people who are so dedicated to their own personal process, which is sort of like being a fine artist, which is saying, any form of making any compromise, that's just too great for me. I can't, I can't. And they love the romanticize the struggle, right?
Yeah.
I would see that in school, because there were people that were going to be illustrators and people that were going to be fine artists. And when I would teach people, young people, you could see people sort of had one or the other kind of personality, right? And if you're going to work with a publisher, they're investing in you, then you have to be willing to work with the person, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure if they come to you and they say, which maybe dovetails into the other part of your career, which is working in animation, when you sell a show, they like your idea, then there's that part of that's development, which is they take your idea and they make it more like the idea that they want. Right?
Yeah.
And there comes a point at which you go, yeah, or no, or I'm willing to give on this, but I'm not willing to give on that. And you can go through all that, and you still don't even get the pilot. You just get the first part of the development, and then you can get the part where you go all the way through.
Yeah.
And you get your show.
Yeah.
And then that morphs too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I've been fortunate enough to get to the other side and have a show. I had a show on Disney Channel called The Replacements. And it is that year where you're putting into making an animatic, and you're putting a whole year into it. It starts with 9 shows that are fighting for one time slot. And then of those 9, it gets whittled down to 3. I mean, the process is different every season, I'm sure. But it was me and 2 other shows. And we were given a budget to make, a 10-minute animatic with, full voice actors, music, and whatever. And you're busting your ass for a whole year just trying to get that one time slot. And it gets to the point, emotional highs and lows. You're getting horrible notes from executives, but you're willing to do anything because that is that big dangling carrot right in your front of your face. And you're working yourself to the bone saying, if I don't get this show, I'm going to fucking murder somebody. Right? And then you finally get it done. And then the show gets greenlit. And then you say, well, now show created by Dan Santat, I can mold it the way I want to. But no, dear reader, it turns out that the people that really pull the strings are all the executives, and the executives who work underneath the president of the animation, company, right? And so it's funny because like you'll make a contribution, and then all these executives are just like, well, I think we should do this. And then you see them look at the president, like trying to get the approval of the president, because they know it's just like, I just want to climb up the ladder to get closer to the president. Like, I want to get up this ladder, right? And then they, they're not looking at me. They don't care what I think. They care what the president thinks. And the president has to look and be like, yeah, I think. So for one example, we had a whole meeting at The Replacements where we had a whole witch hunt over the color pink. And they called me into a meeting and they're just like, yeah, we have an issue with the color pink. And I'm like, what is the issue with the color pink? And they said, well, we're afraid that the color pink is going to detract from the boys market of ages 10 to 12. So we're hoping that there's no pink in the show. And I'm like, what do you mean no pink in the show? And they're like, well, let's go through some of your backdrops. So let's go through some of your backgrounds. Sunset scene. They're like, the sky's a little pink. And I'm like, that's because it's sunset. It's like dusk. And they're just like, well, you make it not pink. And I'm like, okay. Show a living room scene. There's a fireplace. The bricks on this fireplace. I'm like, that's salmon at best, folks. But whatever. And they're like, well, could it be another color like green? And I'm like, what? Like, I hate you. And so I have to go to my colors and I have to tell her, listen, they're having an issue with the color pink from the boys market of 10 to 12. I need you to take all the pink out of all your scenes. And she's like, what? That could take me all night. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. This did not come from me. But like, it turns into this awkward waiting game where you're like, I won't do that. And like it almost pretty much is like, we're not asking you, you know? I had this poor colorist to stay till 2 a.m. to change all the backdrop. Come in the next day, executive comes in. Remember that stuff we said about pink? We made a mistake. Just change it back. And I was like, I have to go back and tell that poor girl to change everything back the way it was. And you're just like, I can't stand the corporate politics that are involved to try to make this show homogenized, right? And that's the issue, ultimately, is that when you work for a big place, they want to try to grab as many viewers as they can in that particular time slot. They will homogenize the whole show in a way that they think can appeal to everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And in the end, it has nothing to say. It's completely sterile. And so after the first show, I found out I got picked up for 2 more seasons. I said, you know what? I will collect your checks, but I don't care what happens to the show out anymore. I'm just going to go make books. And so, you know, I was left with like this little, I would get these little checks like twice a month. And I'm just like, this is nice. I can stay at home. I can make books the way I want to make them. And that was the compromise that I had. I said, you know what? I don't want to work in a corporate environment anymore. But that was the anxiety-ridden thing where it's like, okay, well, now I have to rely on my own judgment of what's good. And when you go to a place like Disney and you're submitting scripts and you're getting notes from executives about every little thing, it fucks with your head. And you sit there and you go, I don't know if I can write anymore. I don't know if anything I do is any good, right? It messes with your head. And it took me a while when my graphic novel Sidekicks came out. And it was like, and then finally, like the reviews came out and I'm like, oh my God, thank God. Like I know how to write. It was okay, right? And it was one of these things where it's a really hard leap of faith to, well, I mean, at least for me, like, again, like I said, imposter syndrome and all that, like I just never thought of myself as a talented artist or a talented writer, you know, and that's why I work so hard, because I was trying to make up for any insecurities that I felt I had about a lack of talent.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what, and Dan, and I'm so glad that you kind of touched on that part of this, of the business, because, you know, again, we're hitting that wall again, right? I'm sure there are people who are watching or going like, well, I wish I had that problem. Right. But until you have that problem and you're like, this is the worst thing ever. How did I get here?
Right. I mean, I know it definitely comes from a privilege perspective, but I do want to make it clear to everybody that I do not take advantage of that. I don't poo-poo it. Right?
No, that's not what I
mean. Like I work my ass off because I know there's a lot of people that would kick a bag of puppies for that opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I need to be good for it.
Mm-hmm. What is the thing, Mike, you talk about the wolf at the door and things like that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I always feel that even no matter how successful you are, if the wolf is not at the door and looking in the window, he's on the front lawn. And every while he looks back at the door, right? You know? Yeah. And again, like if I look at the first half of my career compared to the second half of my career, right? So when second half of my career, I sort of feel like going into animation, which is a very different animal. And picking up what Dan said, you know, you have all of these executives who actually also may change in the middle of your project, right? So like one president goes out and a new president comes in, and that new president goes, everything that the old president did is dead.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
Right? And I remember there was a lot of churn in animation when Disney was having success with these live action shows like Hannah Montana.
That was my time. That was exactly my period. Yeah.
Right. And so all of these executives who don't love cartoons, they don't love cartoons any more than they love potato chips, right? And a lot of people in animation, you will come to find out, don't have any real love of animation. Animation was a way in and
Right.
a stepping stone to go into live action.
Right.
To go much higher.
Yeah.
So you get married to a person in development who takes your idea
Mhm.
and supposedly helps, parent you along to, success. But very often it's such a fear-based system where, like you said, 1 minute they're saying, okay, take the chocolate chips out, put in garlic,
Right.
put in lemongrass, put in Jimmy's, put in sprinkles. No, what? We've never said we liked Jimmy's. We never said that we liked lemongrass, right? Because everybody's chasing what is already successful.
Right.
And you're never going to be as successful because that thing that was successful came out of the blue, like SpongeBob, right? SpongeBob became successful because it was rerun until it found its audience, because at that time, Nickelodeon didn't have enough cartoons. So they ran it, and eventually kids saw it, and they're like, wow, we really like that. They actually had to start the show back up because it was canceled. So if you don't have the personality to be able to navigate that, I mean, that's a heavy lift for some people, right?
Mhm.
Some people are just, they can't navigate that. They're going to get mad and blow up, right? They're going to say, I can't deal with that. Or maybe if a show is really hugely successful, then there's all kinds of other pressure on your show, because, success has 1,000 fathers who all want to say, I'm the reason that the show.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Suddenly all the execs come out, like, they're just like, oh yeah, I supported that from the beginning. Like, you sure?
Right. So I think it's interesting that you had success in one field, went in, dipped your toe, had enough success in that field to get a couple seasons of your show, but then realize in the end what really makes you happy.
Yeah. I mean, even with BEEKLE, like, with my book BEEKLE, I had the option of spinning it off into a series. Like, I could have just made an entire empire out of that award-winning book, right? And I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to just be known as the BEEKLE guy. I don't want to just be known as that one. And so it was kind of like this Maurice Sendak moment where I was just like, well, he could have done more Where the Wild Things Are, Returned, or Where the Wild Things Are, or whatever. But he stuck the landing and he said, no, I'm going off to do other things. And that was my feeling, like, no, I stuck the landing on this book. And to kind of respect and honor the award that it achieved, I'm just going to leave it at that, right? But also, I just don't want to be the BEEKLE guy.
Right.
I'm grateful for that choice that I made.
Well, do you think it's also maybe because, you might think of a concept like a Sherlock Holmes, where there could be multiple adventures of these characters, as opposed to just being one story,
right?
End, right? And there's
it's funny because, like, a lot of my peers, they've asked me, how come you've never done a series before? And for me, the idea is that I need to have something to say. I don't want it to be a serial thing that just goes on and on and on, kind of like, and I'll be honest with you, like, part of Marvel and DC Comics that really exhausted me was that Batman could be tied up with 10 sticks of dynamite around his chest and the Joker's laughing like, try to get out of this one, Batman. And you're like, well, there would be no Batman if he died, right? You wouldn't have Batman comics. And like, listen, I was in line with all those other kids buying The Death of Superman, and then he comes back the very next month and you're like, oh, no, never again will I fall for that, right? And then it wasn't until I remember I was like in the spindles, the monthly spindles, and I look over. I'm in like Walden books, like old school, like Walden books. And I'm looking over, and there's a whole section of comics that are just like The Killing Joke, Elektra Assassin, Akira. Like, what is this stuff? And I'm looking at this issue of Akira, and like Kaneda's holding his friend's head. His head's blown off. I'm like, this is the cover of the book, right? I'm looking at the book and I'm just like, oh, main characters die. Like there's consequences to the stories, right? And I remember I was in Walden Books and I'm like 12, 13 years old. And I'm buying up all these comics. And I go up to the cashier.
I like the horde.
Right.
Right.
I go up to the cashier. Cashier's not even thinking twice. That's $27.50. I put it in my bag and I'm walking out of that mall store. I'm just like, I just robbed a fucking bank. Like, oh my God, what? Oh my God, this kid just bought Akira. I don't think I should be reading these. Yeah. And that was kind of like my transition. Like, oh yeah, from monthlies to like a series where like, oh, there's consequences. So if I were to do a series, there has to be a story arc. There has to be some kind of end. I can't just let it keep going on and on and on until, you know, I want to quit while I'm on top. I don't want to like wait for that moment where it's like, yeah, now's a good time to jump the shark. Right.
Well,
we got some questions in chat. I want to put some of these up in here, like Eternity Forever on YouTube asks, Dan, what's the longest creative drive you had and how did you overcome it?
That's a fantastic question. So, you know, for the longest time, I've been known for picture books, and I did BEEKLE. And then the thing is that when I create, like, I want to create something. I want to feel like I can improve on what I've created, right? And so one of the biggest struggles I had was after BEEKLE, I said, where do I go from here? And luckily, I had a story called After the Fall, and that one's a metaphor about my wife overcoming anxiety and depression. And so in this story, Humpty Dumpty actually survives from the fall. They put him back together again, but he has a fear of heights, right? And so throughout the story, you're trying to ask yourself, like, well, what is it about being on the wall that like, why is an egg on top of the wall? I came up with this idea that he was an avid bird watcher and the best place to watch the birds was at the top of the wall, right? But because of this accident, he had so much anxiety over heights that he compromised. He found different ways to try to observe these things. Because people with anxiety, in order to avoid certain triggers, they'll change their lives so they don't have to experience those triggers, right? And so in this particular case, Humpty Dumpty's just like watching it from the ground with binoculars, and it's miserable. He hates it, right? It pales in comparison. And then it gets to a point where he gets into the hobby of making paper airplanes, and he makes a paper airplane and he throws the paper airplane and it ends up on the wall, and he realizes like, oh God, that was like my best paper airplane. If I want it back, I have to climb that wall. And he goes up and he overcomes his anxiety, and then he's an egg. So he hatches and he turns into a bird and he flies away, right? And for me, like that was my proudest work. That was my proudest work. Like I was so proud of that beyond BEEKLE. But then after that, because I still owe my publisher one more picture book. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, where do I go from that? And I'm coming up with all these stories, and my editor, who's, you know, she's looking for that next great book. And she's like, you can do better than this. You can do better than this. I have submitted 20, 30 ideas. And it gets to the point where, again, it's just kind of like having those executives in the room. Like, I don't know if I know how to write a good picture book anymore, right? And it's been six years I haven't come up with a good picture. I mean, I've had some inkling of ideas for picture books, but, you know, from the concept to connecting it to a good story, like I'm still trying to figure that out. But it's slowly coming along. And my editor tells me the picture book will come when it's ready. Like, you just don't force it. Don't try to make it happen. Just work on something else. And then I shifted gears, and there was something great about doing a graphic novel because, you know, when they look at Dan Santat, they're like, I can't wait for his next picture book. And then you just change the language. You go, you know what? I'm doing a middle grade novel. Look, I'm doing a graphic novel, right? Pressure gone. Now I'm just flowing with ideas for picture books. And now, like, a good chunk of the work that I'm doing in the next 5 years, majority of them are, you know, graphic novels. And now, like, you know, my memoir that just came out, like, now it's a finalist for the National Book Award. And now you're just kind of like, well, oh God, how do I improve on that? You know, you got those picture books, right? Like, but yeah, between After the Fall, it's been 6-7 years. I mean, I guess it's fair to say that I think in terms of the realm of picture books, I have writer's block. because I want to do it right, but I also know I have the time. I've afforded myself the time to work on it, right? And so I'm taking my editor's advice. It'll come when it's ready, but in the meantime, I just I'm not a one-trick pony. I know that there's other stories I can tell and just different ways I can tell it. So you just change the game a little bit and you try to figure things out. So you're still moving forward, but in certain aspects of my career, writer's block.
Wow. I love that. And I want Steve to keep asking questions, but go ahead. I just wanted to throw this in here. Our buddy Mladen says, I read After the Fall to my daughter all the time, and she makes me read all the cereal box names from the 2-page spread in funny voices. It's the power of reading out loud.
It's crazy. Like universally, that's everyone's favorite spread in the book. And just so you know, my favorite spread in my favorite box of cereal. Because if you look at the spread, all the sweet, sugary cereals on the top are for kids, and they're really bright and colorful. And like they have names like, I don't know, like, the sugar bombs and things like that, like things kids would love. And on the bottom, like the palette is completely like desaturated and black and white. And it's like certain cereals are like grown-up food, sticks. One of my favorite ones is a cereal called Sad Clown.
I love that.
Yeah.
Steve, you want to get into?
Oh yeah. We have another one here from YouTube, Scott Kurtz of PvP Online and the upcoming Table Titans.
What up, Scott?
He says, Dan, make me feel better about having decided to take a shot at Kidlit. I'm terrified.
So the folks in Kidlit are very friendly. They're very friendly, and there's a lot of like, editorial world, the editors and art directors, they want to see you succeed, actually, like they're rooting for you. There's a great organization, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, scdwi.org. Fantastic organization. And art directors and editors will go out and they'll critique your portfolios and your manuscripts and things like that. I find that I would say a good 85% of the success in the game is knowing the rules. So, for example, know that a picture book is 32 to 40 pages long. Know that the word count is probably not going to want to exceed 1,200 words for a picture book. Things like that. Now, if you're a comic person trying to get into the children's publishing world, I think right now is a fantastic time to get into it because they are starving. They're starving for graphic novel content. Like, in the last 5 years, all the major publishers, Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, all those guys, they've just sprouted up graphic novel imprints. I mean, we can thank Graphics, we can thank Raina Telgemeier, we can thank Dave Pilkey. I don't know if you know about this. I don't know if you guys read this article, but Dave Pilkey, his last Dogman book 11 of Dogman, it single-handedly grew the graphic novel industry by 11%. Like, that's how huge Dogman is, right? Like, he's a juggernaut. And so I think if you make something of quality and something that speaks to kids, and you submit it to the right editor, and that's always seems to be like the hardest part, finding the right editor that will go to bat for your content and then take it to submissions and fight tooth and nail and say, this publisher should carry this book. Like that's a big part of the battle, trying to find someone who will fight for you, but once you get your foot in the door, I mean, I'm not going to guarantee like, stars and success, but it will be a pleasant experience because, they actually give you an advance that you can live on. Like I remember doing stuff I remember a friend of mine, he submitted a manuscript to Image, and like Image was like, oh yeah, they'll give you $1,000. And I'm like, I'm good. I'm good. Like that's fine. And then I remember getting my first advance for my own graphic novel through Scholastic. And I'm like, oh, I don't have to worry about anything I can just do this book. Like, that's fantastic. Like, that's kind of the difference, and I've seen, again, so like any industry, everything's very cyclical. You have your highs, you have your lows. And like when BEEKLE won the Caldecott medal, picture books were at a high. People couldn't get enough of picture books. Like, they were the hottest selling things, right? And now, right now, like it's terrible. Like like picture books are, are struggling a little bit. YA novels.
And that just happened in the last 8 years, right?
I mean, with picture books, I would actually say maybe in the last, well, I mean, it's unfair to say because like the pandemic sucked the oxygen out of everything.
Yeah.
Right.
If you had a book coming out during the pandemic, I'm sorry, because like you'd be in a Zoom conference like promoting your book, and like everyone's like, yeah, the world's on fire. I don't care about your story, right? But as we've had some time, we got more distance from that cataclysmic event. It's gotten better. Festivals are coming back. People are coming back to conventions and things like that. It's slowly getting better. I mean, even right now, we've got this janky economy that can't decide whether or not it's a soft landing or not, right? And so people are kind of holding on to their dollars and cents on whether or not. But I mean, it's not going to be like this forever. It's going to get better. And, you hit your timing at the right time and, your book comes out at the right time. Who knows? Like you could be doing very well. So
thanks for the question, Scott. That's awesome. We got another one from YouTube. Mladen making a second appearance. Dan, how do you structure a narrative for a kid's book that has a lasting effect on both kids and adults, but treats both audiences as equals and doesn't preach or talk down to the kids?
That's a fantastic question. There is, I guess the best way to describe it is there are people who write they write very young, like, Tina the kitty cat wants to eat his cupcake, right? Stories like that might sell really well with kids. Maybe a grown-up's like, oh God, you want me to read this again? You want me to read this again? Like, I would rather die. And then there's other books that don't talk down to a child. And I'm not saying that, kitty cat eating a cupcake is talking down to a child. It's probably giving the little child exactly what they want. Mm-hmm. But also the kind of writing that writes something that speaks really deep into their soul that the kid doesn't realize they didn't realize that they wanted it.
Yeah. And
you write something that can appeal to an adult, but if you say it the right way, it'll also speak to a child, And so the thing that you hear all the time is, don't talk down to your audience because they're not dumb. They'll live up to your standards of like what you want to communicate. And so really I think the key there is just don't talk down to your audience. Like if they're kids, write a story, but like don't you see people talking to dogs like, oh, little puppy wuppy, like don't do that. Like you look at your dog, you go, hey, I think it's time to go for a walk. How about that?
See, there goes my idea. I was going to do puppy wuppy.
Yeah, right.
Flip the table, yeah. And Dan, to what Dan just said, just kind of coming across different groups of people who are from either side of this new world I'm in, and some people, their idea of kids book is just that. It's, you decided to cash in and write, brush your teeth, 1, 2, 3, ABC.
Right.
And like nobody I know does that kind of work. No knock to that, but that's not what this is.
You'll be surprised at the use of picture books in certain things. Like Min Lay, right? Mm-hmm. So Min Lay is an author that I worked with. We did a book together called Drawn Together, but he went to Harvard. He went to Harvard and he has friends at Harvard who was a philosophy professor. And one day he went into his friend's class during a lecture, and his philosophy professor at Harvard was teaching existentialism through After the Fall. Mm-hmm. And I was just, he took a photo of it and he's like, Dan, they're teaching your book at Harvard. Like, this is crazy. And I'm like, what? Like, that's some bragging rights there. Right.
Right.
And if you're writing something, from my experience, like it was just me speaking from the heart about anxiety and depression in my wife. But if you if you present it in a way where you're just talking about fear, that's a universal theme that anybody can appreciate, right? Kids can be afraid of like falling off a bike and trying to get back on that bike again. I got a number of people, mostly adults, who would email me or direct message me on social media, being very open and honest about their anxieties. Definitely like professionals in our field of kid lit. I don't think you realize how many people have anxiety, social anxiety, and things like that. To the point where I'm thinking to myself, like, is something wrong with me that like I'm not terrified about speaking in front of a crowd of people? Like something's wrong with me because like I'm
That's
just
your anxiety.
right. Like I should have anxiety. That would be the normal thing, right? And so you write, you write your truth, your deep dark truth, and you're going to realize that there's a lot of people that connect with you on certain levels. It's just not said out loud.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, were you going to say something, Steve?
Well, we had another question in the YouTube, but I didn't want to derail that. If you have something to add.
Well, I just had this thought about that speaking part, and that other part of this pie is engaging promotion, and promotion comes in a lot of different ways, school visits, all the kind of things.
Yeah.
And I've run into a lot of maybe in the comic book space, maybe less authors who go, and there's some, Dan, I'm sure we could talk about that, who go, no thanks. I just want to write my stuff or draw my stuff.
Sure.
The idea of going to an elementary school gives me rickets. I would never want to
Right.
step into a building like that. How do you do that? So maybe before Steve asks his next question, how do you, can you maybe talk a little bit about the road and like how you structure doing visits and lectures and stuff?
So a couple of things. So, I've spoken in different aspects. So like on a university level, like if I go speak at SVA or Savannah or Wash U or, NYU or UCLA or things like that, you're talking to people who want to talk about craft or maybe the length of a career, how to stay on top of your game. And, when you approach that, you tell your truth. You talk about the anxieties you had about breaking into the business. You talk about how important it is to, you'll be surprised. Like I hate to say it. Promotion is probably like 70% of the game. You can make beautiful work, but there's a lot of people out there that make beautiful work. And there's some people who make really beautiful work and have absolutely no interest. I'm not naming names, but I had a friend who did this gorgeous picture book, had no interest in promoting it, going out, speaking at schools. Beautiful. Like this guy did New Yorker covers and everything. Like he was a very talented artist. And he did this beautiful picture book. And I remember talking to the editor, and he was just like, if he just went on the road, he would sell so many copies. And he just, to each his own, because like he really was like a hermit. Like he never wanted to interact with people. And it's like, that's fine, but I also see that as like maybe a missed opportunity. Now, you talk about people who say like, I just make my work. I don't care who reads it. And you're like, you're a fucking liar. Okay? Because and I'll give you an example, because I've spoken to certain people where they do a beautiful book, and then there's rumblings on social media about, oh, this person could win a prestigious award, right? And maybe on the outside they go, I don't care about awards. But then like when they end up winning the award and you hear them talking about it, they're like, I couldn't sleep that night. And it's like, yeah, that's because you fucking cared, but you're too cool to admit it. But you care, And I think there's something about a lot of people who, because no one wants to make something and then have someone come by and be like, that sucks. Like, no one does that. Like, I don't care who you are. You make something and you want your talents to be admired. You don't want people to be like, yeah, don't do that. Don't listen. That guy sucks, right? And so when I go speak at a university level, a big chunk about it is the hustle. Because from my own personal experience, I feel like the hustle is what got me here. So I always just constantly reiterate the hustle. And I show them everything. I show them work that I did before I went to art school. I show them student work, like gross, disgusting student work, where I'm just like, look, I'm showing this to you because I have a point. Because when you look at this and you look at the work that I have now, you're going to see an evolution of your work. and everyone grows. And if you're not growing, if you're not willing to change and adapt and like try new things, then you're going to be stagnant and you're going to die, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the good things about reflecting back on your work is that if you can look back at your work and be like, oh God, that sucks, that means you're improving. That means you've learned something. That's an important part about it all, right? Now, when you're talking to kids, a lot of it is almost like testing material. Like, you know, comedians have their type 5. Or maybe you're workshopping a book, throwing a joke there, throwing a joke here, see how it works. Say, okay, maybe that'll work for the picture book, right? So it's a symbiotic relationship where, you know, you're entertaining the kids, but you're also gaining information and knowledge from them. And so, you know, I actually learned something from Lemony Snicket, because it used to be that, you know, I would go out there, talk about the process of making the book, and like I was just like, and I remember having to follow after Mr. Daniel Handler one year, and he was so good. He always ends his presentation with screaming out of the room. And what I found out was that every kid was so in love with his presentation, they ran out of the room with him. And then when it was time for me to go on, it was me and like 5 people, and I was like, I'm gonna have to work on this presentation, because that killed, right? And so I realized it wasn't so much about me trying to. When I'm doing a school presentation, I'm not selling a book.
Right.
I'm putting on a show. Much different than lecturing at a school. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not only just fun for the audience, but it's fun for me, you know? Because the last thing I want to be is that person peddling my wares. Like, hey, this book's in stores now, because it just reeks. It's like everyone's like, yeah, I get it, you know? But if you can put on a show and have some fun and throw some jokes out there to the grown-ups that are just like, oh, yeah, you made a joke, you made a reference to Falcon Crest. Like, I can appreciate that, right? You know, I want everybody to have a good time. And then you kind of build this brand of this person like, oh, I want to watch his next thing, because I don't care what book he's selling. He's just a fun, entertaining guy to watch, right? And you do that for the last year, you tend to type 5, type 10, you know?
I love
and
it.
that's my role.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing. Because during the pandemic, when everybody had to do everything over Zoom, it was miserable. Because in the beginning, all the schools would turn off their cameras and turn off their mics, and they'd say, okay, well, that's this, and you know, to protect the kids, you know. So you're gonna be presenting in front of a black screen, and it's just like you're looking at your face in the mirror, and you're like cracking all these jokes, and I'm like, I don't know if anybody's on the other side. This is Clockwork Orange stuff. I am miserable, right? And this is awful. And then one day, I remember I was on Google Meetup, and it was one of those ones where all the kids were home, and it was dependent on them to have their mute button on. And I remember asking a rhetorical question, just saying like, "Hey, how are we all doing today?" I'm fine too. You have a puppy. Like, am I? Oh my gosh, this is completely going off the rails. Principal comes on. It's just like, kids. You have to keep that mute button on, because Mr. Santat can't do his presentation. Meanwhile, the parents are just like, I'm sad. I'm doom scrolling over here. I don't care what happens to my kids. I'm just trying to like have an hour to myself, right? And I'm sitting there, and then suddenly I just said, okay, kids, grab a piece of paper and a pencil. We're gonna start drawing. And then almost in an instant, the whole chat just goes quiet, and you hear this kid say, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm drawing. You want to draw with me?" And it's just silence. And I realized, like, oh my God, this is the power that I have over these kids, and it doesn't take much. And the one thing that I realized after doing quiet presentations is that I miss the voice of kids. I miss the sound of kids. And I wasn't a person that actually loved doing presentations at first, but I got to a point where I said, oh my God, I just miss human contact. And to hear these kids, like, that's everything. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, go ahead. You have the floor.
All right. And we have a question from YouTube. Bill asks, thanks for the question, Bill. How much content do you typically need to show for a graphic novel? A lot of our viewers are aspiring creators or want to move into this space. So
Right. So I think the answer might be different for me and like JAMAR, you know. So when I initially did Sidekicks, which was my first, I wrote a really tight outline, which was about 26 pages. Like I explained what was going on, every scene, you know, and why things were happening and who the characters were. And then from that point, I did maybe a script of one of the chapters, which probably was 12, 14 pages of text script. And then, oh gosh, maybe 8 to 10 pages of finished art with text bubbles in there. It varies with different publishers. I mean, it could be that maybe you already have a backlist of webcomics, which if you send in an outline, but then you have a body of work, because I think the biggest concern is that they know that you're good for it and that you can deliver something. So it varies with everybody. But if you're like someone who's never done a comic before, you're probably going to have to show quite a bit in order for them to be convinced. Like, yeah, we'll give you this bag of money.
Well, and if you think about it, I mean, it only makes sense that if they're going to invest all that time and energy and block out
right
the space for you to be,
right.
If you blow up on the road, they can't necessarily just slide somebody else back
right
in that spot, because they tend to work very far out.
Yeah. You finish the book a year before publication because they have to.
Then that's something that's very different between comics, regular comics, and graphic novels too. Is like regular comics is like a 3-month window. Like we advertise the comic, and in June for September.
Right.
But in June they're advertising next spring.
Yeah.
Or thinking even maybe beyond that, right? So it's a very different. It's a different process, and even how like comics is for 99% of people in the direct market. It's short term. You're used to running like these wind sprints to do your 22 pages, right? You wish maybe if you had a graphic novel for Marvel or DC, it's still not that window that you guys get in, like you and Jamar get in publishing. It's not.
I mean, one of the benefits of also creating your own content is that you retain the rights, you earn royalties. Like, how many artists have I seen that do Marvel or DC comics, and then once they're done, you're like a WWF wrestler. It's just like, well, thanks for your time. You get no royalties, but you own your own property.
Royalties in the 90s. You got royalties in the 90s, and then I still get royalties. I mean, enough from Marvel that I can go buy myself a hoagie. DC a little bit better.
On it.
DC a little bit better because the Dark Knight stuff continues to sell and sell and sell. And I have enough stuff. That's the other thing. If you have enough stuff over the course of 20 years, something is probably always being reprinted. But it's 1%, 1.5%. You get 1.5% as penciler, 1.5% as inker. So maybe I get 3% on a book, right? After they make their money, right? So it's a whole different ball game. And I think there are probably plenty of people in the direct market who could do a graphic novel. I think, but they have to sort of wrap their head around a different creative process, because you used to have very good editors in comics. Like when I started, you had people like Archie Goodwin, been around a long time. I mean, people who had been in the business for decades. And so if that person said to you, well, I like your idea, but this part in this chapter is not clear, or this angle on this person doing something, I can't see their face, so it's not, the drawing is okay, but the storytelling is not good, right?
Right.
I think that's where having an editor who understands the audience, right? So you guys are relying upon the editor to help you, but also your editor understands the audience that you guys are trying to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Which is different. So it's not just like a capricious thing like, well, what's hot this week?
Right. Exactly.
Polka dots and dinosaurs. So all your characters now are going to be wearing polka dots, right? And your lead character's dog is now a Tyrannosaurus.
Dan, I want to be sensitive to your time. How are you doing on time? You need to start wrapping.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, because my kid now needs to be picked up from his school volleyball game.
Oh no, well, I don't want to wait on the side of the road.
I mean, he's hanging out at a friend's house right now, but he's just like, hey old man.
All right, well,
I'll get you when I'm ready.
All right. Well, we have one more nice question, and then we'll let you go into the night. So, Steve, you want to hit that last question from Aladdin?
Will do. From today's MVP, Aladdin, on YouTube, Dan's art style seems to match his storytelling voice perfectly. Is that something that came organically, or did you have to work on it?
It's funny that you say that, because I remember going to art school, and the illustration teachers were the ones that said, find a style, because your work, you're going to be hired for the way you draw things, right? And the most useful information that I ever got wasn't from an illustration teacher, it was from an advertising teacher. And he sat me down, and he was just like, you ever heard that term, form follows function? That's a design term. A lot of graphic designers use it, a lot of industrial designers making furniture and things like that. Form follows function. You design towards the functionality of the thing, right? And so he said to me, he says, do not be a style, because styles come and go. Styles are good for maybe 6 or 8 years, and then people move on to the next hot thing, and then you're forgotten. And that's what's with the style. If you're going to be an author, if you're going to be an artist, be someone that is formless, like Bruce Lee, be like water, okay? Don't have a style. Be known as someone who solves problems. So if you need to do something, you adapt to the problem at hand. And so I've never considered myself as somebody who has a style or a voice. I just consider myself someone who says, I want to do a horror story, but it needs to feel like a horror story. I need to do a cute kitten book, but it can't feel like a horror story. It needs to feel cute and cuddly, right? You adapt to the problem at hand. And now I think one of the benefits that we have as artists and writers is that it's coming from the same mind, right? Mm-hmm. So you could write something, but you might have a completely different visual in your head of what the text is saying and what you want to illustrate. And that's mm-hmm. one of probably the advantages you have if you're doing a comic and it's done by one person, is that the whole movie is in your head, right? You just need to put it out on paper. And really, I think for me, the benefit was that I wasn't searching for a style. I just said, this is how I do things. And I was just being truly honest with myself. Mm-hmm. And I mean, luckily enough, people respond to it. And I think a big part of it comes from having strong foundational skills, being able to draw, turn the form, know your color theory, but then you can adapt it to different ways that you need to. Like, that's everything. That's everything. So, a lot of it comes with practice. I think, it's that fake it till you make it, like, oh, I love the work of so-and-so. I love the work of that person or that person. And you're not copying, you're appropriating little things here and there. I like the way they draw eyes. I like the way they do opening paragraphs. And then you kind of become this vessel of a bunch of creatives, but you've just remade the recipe for the same cake, right? Right. You're just doing it your own different way.
I love it.
Beautiful.
And our man Bill West says, I needed to hear that. You needed that gospel. You
Nice.
got that gospel, Dan
Nice.
Santat.
I'm glad people. Yeah, I'm glad people found what I had to say useful.
Thank you, man. Dan, we've put on the screen a couple of times where people can find you in the world. Do you want to tell us one more time where? How can people find you?
Instagram, Instagram, Twitter X at dsantat. I'm on Facebook as Dan Santat, I guess. I have a website on Tumblr. It's dansantatbooks.com. I think that's it. I mean, just Google me. You'll find my books here and there. I've done. You Google me, you'll find numerous interviews, NPR.
And one thing before you get out of here, because I've been sharing on my Facebook, you standing out on the side of, I think, were you doing some Jake Gyllenhaal stuff?
Yeah, I don't want to drop names, but I did a book launch with Jake Gyllenhaal, Mr. Donnie Darko himself, and it was funny because it was like all these bros, like it was like all these people like waiting outside to have him sign, like Donnie Darko posters and things like that, and I'm walking by and I'm like, oh my god, like he's got some fans that just want to be here to like get their swag signed and made out to eBay, right?
Yeah.
And then after the event, we parted ways. No one realized that Jake took, a completely different exit into like a van in some other direction. So
Unmarked van.
Yeah. And it was like me and a bunch of other people like walking through that crowd again, like these people don't know Jake Gyllenhaal already left, right? And then suddenly, like they see me, and then they're all coming up to me like they want me to sign the book, and I'm like, you must be mistaking me for somebody else. And they're asking me to sign their books, and then suddenly it became like one person, 10 people, 20, 30, and I was just like, oh my god, there must be some mistake. Right? Unless I look like Jake Gyllenhaal.
That was fantastic, but that's the power of art, man.
Yeah,
Dan, thank you so much for being on the show. I know you're a busy guy. I'm surprised I caught you at home.
A lot of fun. This is so great. Love talking about the biz.
And happy birthday, Dan Santat.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you. I am 48 years young.
Woo! Almost to 50. So we do a thing on our way out of here, Dan. I don't know if you've seen it, but maybe you can help us out real quick. Guys, we had a fantastic episode. We're going to get out of here. We're going to let Dan pick up his children. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we're in the end game now. So I think it will behoove all of us to, all right, Dan, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make sure we wash our curvy hands. You got a good curvy hand out there. There you go.
Oh, there you go. Look at that.
There you go. Happy birthday.
Wash your birthday hands before you eat the cake.
I don't like my hand. That looks like I'm groping something.
Oh, well, yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, you guys. See you next week.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.